Welcome back to Low Risk Takedowns. In today's video, I'll teach you how to attack from the close range, and we'll troubleshoot some of the most common problems along the way. Stay tuned to the end for some games you can play to sharpen those skills. We're gonna start today in an underhook in the dogfight. So I have an underhook, my opponent has an overhook. The way I win this position is through good posture. So the first thing I'm looking for is a deep shoulder position. I wanna beat his shoulder with this underhook. Now, as I get here, I don't want his head under my chin. This will create a frame that prevents me from progressing. And so instead, I'm gonna look to gain head position of my own, keeping him bullied out of the pocket here. Now, the next thing for me to do is look for wrist control. Now, if I reach overhand, my elbow flares and it gives him space to punch an underhook. So instead, I'm gonna keep my elbow tight and I'm gonna look to find his wrist underhand. Once I get a hold of it, I can whip it out slightly and punch my other underhook for a body lock. So I whip, punch, and lock my hands. Now, if my opponent does manage to get his underhook, I'm gonna have to beat this to secure my body lock. So the easiest way to deal with this is a simple pummel. I'm gonna punch my underhook shoulder forward to create some space, and then I'm gonna swim my overhook hand inside to secure my second underhook. Now I can lock my hands and secure position. Now, if this underhook is particularly tight and I can't do a simple pummel, I'm instead gonna slide my overhook hand down the bicep to the elbow pit, and I'm gonna start weighing heavy on it. Now, as I weigh my weight down on it, it creates a little bit of space to slide down to the wrist, whip the hand, and punch my underhook. Now, as you look to pry this bicep off and punch your underhook, it's very important that you keep this near side leg out of reach. If I'm here and I push his hand down, he's just gonna collect my leg. So make sure that as you go to pry this underhook off, you step that leg back, hanging weight down on his arm. Then you can grip, punch, and go. Now, as we make it to this body lock, it's very important that I take an angle on my opponent. If I stand square to him, he can clamp down on both my underhooks and start framing me away. And so I make sure to get at an angle and gain head position as I do. Now, I don't want him to pummel under this body lock, so I want my front hand, the one across his belt line, to be elbow in. This allows me to close the space and makes it really difficult for him to pummel. As I get to good posture, I want to take a look at my opponent's positioning to decide what takedown to use. If I get to a body lock and my opponent's hips are backed away, I'm gonna hit a spiral walk down. If I were to step behind him and try to lift him, I might get thrown. And so instead, I'm gonna take a step with my lead leg in front of his base. Now, as I do this, I point my knee towards his tailbone and I effectively shelve this lead leg. So I step nice and deep, pointing that knee and shelving the lead leg. Now, I'm just going to walk in a spiral and bring him down over this shelf. So I hold my grip tight, I walk, and put him right down. Now, while there are some throws that require me to point my knee forward as I step in, they require a lot of commitment, and so they're a little bit more risky. Instead, if I point my knee towards his tailbone, I can keep both feet on the ground and shuffle my way to a takedown. Now, if instead I get to this body lock and my opponent is stood upright, it doesn't make sense to step in front because his base is good there. And so instead, I'm gonna build a shelf behind this lead leg. As I do this, I wanna make sure I step with my hips lower than his to avoid being thrown, and I wanna build a deep shelf with my thigh under his. Keeping my grip tight and my head tight as well, I can use those pieces to draw him over this shelf. So I pull backwards towards my back pocket and I spiral him down. These two takedowns can be used together as a dilemma. If my opponent backs his hips away, I'm gonna look for my spiral lockdown. If he steps his hips forward to avoid that, I can then step behind and shelve. As I do this, I can create off balances that eventually lead to a takedown. Now, if I get to this body lock and my opponent begins to square up to me, I can hit a quick knee tap. So he brought his rear leg within reach of my forehand, and so I'm just gonna drop my level, I'm gonna throw my underhook to the ceiling, and I'm going to block his far leg. I go wrist deep over this leg, making sure to collect it nice and tight, and I'm going to use this underhook to run him over this obstacle. So I shuffle my feet in front of him and run him down. Now, as I attack my opponent's base with these takedown threats, sometimes his overhook will loosen. If I ever feel his overhook loosen up, I can easily shuck my way to the back. I'm going to send my lead elbow down against his hips, creating a pivot. I'm going to send my rear elbow high against his back to fold him over it. And then I'm going to use my footwork to get around the corner. Now, as I get to this rear body lock, I want to place my grip in the proper position. So I lay my hands over one of his hips, giving me a long arm and a short arm. Now my short arm, the rear hand, is gonna be palm up as my long arm is palm down. This allows me to draw my elbows in tight, cinching that grip up nice and tight. Now as I get here, the first thing I'm gonna try is a hip cinch to put him down. So I drop this grip about a ½ inch below his hip bone, and I begin cinching my elbows together. As I do this, it puts a tremendous amount of pressure on his lead leg, and if I drive some weight towards it, it's gonna easily put him down. Now, while this is a great thing to try at first, it doesn't work on everybody, but it does create an off balance. So what typically happens is, as I go to hip cinch, my opponent bases out strong. Now, as my opponent defends this by basing out, he opens himself up to a rear trip. So I'm going to drop down to my rear knee, and I'm going to build a shelf with my lead leg across his hip line. As I drop down, I keep my grip tight, and I begin to rotate with my entire body across this shelf, putting him down. Now, a super common misconception about this technique is that I'm tripping this far leg. The problem is, if he's really tall, I'm not going to be able to reach that far leg. Really, this is more like a hip throw, where I'm dragging his hips close to mine and across this thigh. And so I pull him in tight, and I use my entire upper body to circle and put him down. A common mistake I see as people try this rear trip is loosening their grip as they fall down, and then trying to pull their partner in. This is difficult because it requires the strength of your arms. Instead, I want to lock my grip in place, and as I fall into position, I'm going to pull him over with my body weight. Now, if instead of setting in, my opponent is fighting the hands and playing light on his feet, it opens him up to a quick foot sweep. So my goal here is to catch his leg while it's light and sweep through the remaining leg. So to encourage that type of rhythm, I'm gonna first use an inside foot sweep to off balance to set up my final foot sweep. So I sweep using my rear leg, attaching to the inside of his calf and kicking his foot out. Now, as that happens, he's forced to take a step with his secondary leg, opening him up to a nice foot sweep. Now for some games you can play to sharpen up those skills. This first game begins from the dogfight. So I have an underhook and my opponent has an overhook. I'm going to win by gathering a body lock or a rear body lock. I lose if my opponent is able to disconnect. This next game starts from the body lock. So I have 2 underhooks and head position. I win by either takedown or rear body lock. My opponent wins by pummeling an underhook or disconnecting. This last game starts from the rear body lock. I'm going to win by takedown, and my opponent can win by disconnecting. Thanks for watching. Try this out in training and drop any questions below.